Welcome, guys, to our podcast. This is your host Hans. We have Don Finn today with us, with the who started with his career as a litigation lawyer with experience of 40 years. At the age of 44, he started his company, HR company, which was being used by 3,500 different companies, and he sold his company after running it for 12 years. Just just think of it. At 44, I'm at 25, and I still feel, I'm lazy, I'm this and that. And he started his company at 44, ran it for 12 years, and then sold that company. In the last 6 years, he has done 14 LinkedIn training in the last 6 years, and it has been translated into six different languages. And he has his hand into many things. He's not like me who just want to do one thing. I'm not, I'm super amazed by listening to it, how he can have his hands into so many things and still manage his personal and professional life while making huge money. So I welcome you, Don, here. Give audience a bit about you. I think you would be a great person to tell more about you, what you're looking forward to right now, and how you have been able to get till here. Yeah.
Well, that's a lot of questions at once, but we'll start off with who I am, okay? You can hear my New York accent. I grew up in a city in New York City. And at 20, I came to San Diego to work on a tuna boat to straighten out. So some guys ended up in the Navy. I ended up on a tuna boat, and it did exactly what it was supposed to do. Got me out from the party scene, for lack of a better term, that I was involved in New York. And when you're fishing in the middle of the ocean, there's no clubs, and so I straightened out. I went back to college, got pretty much straight A's for 2.5 years, and then decided I'd go to law school. And I had my first son at 21, my second one at 22. So I was finishing up college with 2 kids. I worked full time, took 18 units. My wife didn't work. And then I went to law school, and I continued to take 18 units. I'm paying for it. I got no support from any place. And so I was going to take as many units as they would let me. And I was not supposed to work, but I did anyway because we needed to do that. I had 2 young kids. My wife didn't work. And so those were intense years, for lack of a better term, but they were good years, and then I began my litigation practice. And interestingly, I'll back up a little bit. One reason I became a lawyer is because of the story about how to be a hero that I grew up with. So my mom pretty much raised me and my 2 younger sisters for many years, and I wanted to be a hero to her. And a story in my environment, in order to be the hero, become my son the lawyer or my son the doctor. There was no entrepreneurs. There was none of that going around back then. Okay, it was your way in out of the inner city into a good life was to become a professional. And if you became a lawyer or a doctor, that's the high end of being a professional, right?
Yep.
So I became a lawyer. And part of the other story that I grew up in the 70s is that if you're going to be that lawyer or that doctor, then you help us. You don't go selling out and work down on Wall Street or in a Beverly Hills plastic surgery clinic, okay? You help us. And so along those lines, when I started my practice, I got fascinated by the employment environment, and I became an employment lawyer. Originally, it's just labor work back there, the union stuff. Then it got into the non-union litigation, which is where I started. And I did some of the very early sexual harassment and discrimination and glass ceiling. And as I mentioned, later on in my career, at the end of it, I was representing nuclear power plant whistleblowers, engineers who complained about design flaws at San Onofre and Diablo Canyon. And because they complained about them, their careers were kind of ruined. And we litigated those cases for 6 years because they would never let me take those cases to trial. They kept me on appeal, and it was me against these big companies. And so eventually that kind of wore out my marriage. Can't work 70 hours a week and retain a marriage. Okay. That's the sad part of it. And I was doing it for the cause. And then I realized how tainted that whole thing was. And my clients said, you know what, let's just take whatever money they give us. we're out of this. This is ridiculous. It's not justice. And I agreed. And that's when I quit litigation. So I had a little floundering after that. Well, where do I land? And I started doing some front end compliance consulting. So my first book, I self-published books. So my first book was called Lawsuit Free. And that was my first presentations that I gave to HR groups and CEO groups. And I literally started off with a program, Lawsuit Free, with 6 cassette tapes and a floppy disk and a plastic binder, the old school information product, and I really studied that. And then the internet came along and I put all that on the internet, and then I built it from there, and I changed it to HR That Works because I went past just the legal side. At that time, I also started speaking to the CEO groups, and for Vistage, VISTAG is the world's largest CEO group, and I've now spoken for them over 600 times. But I was also asked by the head of HR at that company to run a group just like the CEO groups of the top HR people in San Diego. So I had people from Qualcomm and Illumina and Callaway Golf and University of California. And I ran that group for 5 years. And that's where I really learned about strategic HR. So I always knew the law, but I really understood about everything from recruitment to termination and everything in between. Started with my work with that group of very high-end HR executives, and running that for 5 years until my business got so busy I had to stop running that and I handed it off to somebody else, was where I really started learning about strategic HR.
Yeah.
So, I'll stop there and let you catch up.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of things going around in your life at the same time. Before we go inside what got you into entrepreneurship, just give me a thought on how hard it was leaving your job, which you are doing from very long. You're doing litigation and stuff, and it's a big risk at this age of point.
I've changed careers a couple of times. Okay, so interesting. Towards that end of that career, I met a woman that I ended up writing some books with. That was kind of my first coach, mentor, a woman named Loy. And one of the questions she asked me is a question I ask clients that I coach often. Have you gotten everything out of this that you need to get out of it? I said, is there any kind of cherry on top that you want out of your litigation career? I said, no, I've gotten everything, every last ounce I need out of this. So it was easy to let go. In fact, it was interesting. I was coaching an executive that run one of the big private schools here in San Diego, very successful. And he was ready to leave and do something else. And I said, have you gotten everything out of this that you want to get out of it? Or is there a cherry on top? And he goes, I really want to leave this place in good shape. So he stayed on one more year, planning his exit and just saying, I'm out of here. Okay. And it was done really well and gracefully, and it left the school in great shape and helped him go to his next career very well. So that's a question, have you gotten everything out of this you need to get out of this? And for me, leaving litigation, every last ounce I got out of it. Okay. And then you're like, all right, what do you know to do? I only knew litigation, but I knew the law. And that's when I started putting together materials. So I got fascinated by information marketing, Dan Kennedy and those people back then. And so I started following a lot of those formulas around how to do the information marketing. Now, one thing that really tipped my business over. So originally I was trying to sell my HR program. It was called HR That Works. I was trying to sell it to HR people directly. And I quickly realized those are the last people you want to try to sell anything to, okay? Because they're so slow to make decisions. They don't have a purse string all the time. And so about that same time, I was asked to speak to a group of workers' compensation insurance brokers about what we call the Bermuda Triangle, just some compliance stuff. But I also started teaching them about the emotional stuff, the stage they sit on in sales. And immediately I realized that I could provide my tools as value added for them. So I was learning through Kennedy about triangular relationships. Instead of trying to sell directly, sell through somebody. All right. So what I did is I private labeled my whole program for companies, for insurance brokers, and then they bought a minimum of 25 and up to about 100 licenses for their clients. So, and it's a lot easier to sell to a salesperson than it is an HR person. All right. They're always looking for that extra arrow in their quiver, as they say. And so I was one of the first companies in the country, because the internet had just kind of broke out, that was set up for that. And, early adoption, early first in time. And I had a really good business. And after working the 70 hours a week, I was reading a lot around time management, because I needed to get that down. And I read Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Work Week, right?
Yeah.
And even though it's a metaphor, and Tim will admit that's just a good title they looked for and they found it, the idea of leveraging technology and leveraging systems, and the reality is I don't have to work crazy hours. So when I built that company, I made a decision at that point in my life, and now I was a little about 44, that I would never work over 40 hours a week again, and I have not. Okay, absolutely strange emergency. And I wouldn't allow any of my employees to work over 40 hours a week. So that means we had to be really effective about how we used our time. And I read 12 books on time management. I wrote a book around time management, and we engaged in all those practices. And one of the things, for example, I realized very quickly, if I'm paying somebody $100,000 a year, I'm paying them roughly $50 an hour.
Yeah.
How much $20 an hour work do you want them to do?
Yeah, makes sense.
None.
We want at least $100 of work to be done by them.
So everybody tells me they're on overwhelm, and then when I get to what they actually do, they're on overwhelm because they're still doing $20 an hour work. And if you're CEO and you're making $300 an hour, $500 an hour, whatever it is, why are you doing $100 an hour work? And so one of the major things that I did with my employees is I did not allow them to do $20 an hour work. I took that away, and as a result, they were more effective in those 40 hours than the vast majority of people are in their 50 to 60 hours, right? And I was able to pay them more than the average, because that average pay includes the $20 an hour work, right? Because that's going on. And when I sold my company, they were very surprised about how much revenue I had per employee and how much I paid my employees. And I had zero unwanted turnover for 12 years. Okay.
Really?
All these things I learned about management and leadership, I applied, and when I got to that place, I had to make a decision. Am I going to build a business that supports a lifestyle, or am I going to try to exhaust myself the way I did for the previous 17 years and try to get rich?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
and I made the decision that I'm going to build a lifestyle business, for lack of a better term. I've made good money. I sold it for decent money, not, what they might call FU money or whatever like that. So, but I've been able to support my family. I've lived a good life, and I don't live in a mansion, but I live by the beach in a 3-bedroom. It's all good, no problem. Okay. So that was a decision I made early on. And after selling that company, then I had the opportunity. I worked with them 2 years after I sold it. So from 2014 to 2016, I was commuting back and forth between San Diego and Pleasanton to their offices. And then when I finished with that, then I decided to double down on some of the work I've been doing already.
How was it selling your company? Because it's something you are building from scratch for 12 years. And I know a very big part of it is, you sell the company, you make a big money out of it, you sell it at a specific valuation, but there is some very deep emotional connection. It is like you build a baby, from 1 to 12 years. How was it selling
it goes back to that question Loy asked me. Have you gotten everything out of this you have to get out of it? There's no more growth for me there. No more growth. And my whole thing about my currency in life is learning and growth, not money. If I do a good job of learning and growth, the money comes. All right. I've never known anybody who's been a learning and growth freak that's financially stressed. Okay. It doesn't happen. All right. So that was my main currency. I've read over 1,000 books.
Uh-huh.
You can do that when you work 40 hours a week. I didn't start reading all those books until, my early 40s, when I said no more 70-hour week stuff,
Yeah.
and so that really allowed me to accelerate my learning and become that much more valuable to the CEOs and the organizations and the people I coach and the work that I do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you told, you went from working 70 hours a week to overworking less than 40 hours a week while
Yeah,
making more, while hiring other people, while managing your company and other parts of your life. You know,
yeah,
you mentioned one great tip, which is, you hire people and make them do work which is more valuable than you pay them. So let's say you are paying them $20, you make them work on task which is like $100, $200. Give us
Before that's not really the way let me explain it a little bit
yeah,
better. Okay. So I asked CEOs when I do the workshops to them, I said, how many of you would pull out a $50 bill out of your pocket and ask somebody to do $20 an hour work with it? And some of them realized right away, oh, I'm doing that already, So they know the trap question, right?
yeah,
And everybody, the zeitgeist of so many people today, that's a good German word, zeitgeist, right? Spirit of the times, is that people are overwhelmed and feeling underappreciated. I see
yeah,
that everywhere. CEOs feel overwhelmed and underappreciated. They work so hard, they come home. Where's the appreciation, right? And nobody at the company is going to give them appreciation because they're being afraid of being a butt kisser. They don't want to be viewed as that guy, or that woman. So sometimes these CEOs who do work really hard get very little acknowledgement for it. Maybe
yeah,
from their peers in the groups or something like that. Yeah, I'm right there with you, buddy. But when they go home, it's like,
mhm,
and what I realized is so many of the CEOs that spend so much time and spend so much energy to do so much for their family, to do so much for them. That's their story about what their family wants and needs.
yeah,
It's not the family story. You ask
mhm,
those kids, hey, would you rather have your dad home or in a smaller house where you get to see him, or would you rather stay in his big house and not see your dad? Which would you rather have? And I think a lot of times we say that we're doing it for them. No, we're not. We're doing it for ourselves. That's a story of what we want for them.
yeah, that's true.
Okay. And that's a challenge I see with so many people. And if you do that for your whole career, and then you sell your company, you don't know what to do with yourself after that because you've done nothing else with yourself after that.
Yeah,
I don't. For me, I don't have enough lifetimes to do all the things I want to do.
yeah, yeah. At that point of time, I think you're like, what should I do at this point of time? And sometimes you feel, I'm at this point of my life, and sometimes you regret it. Have you regret at that point of time, which is like, I would like, I should have learned something else. I should have also traveled. I should have also spent more time with my family. Or do you still think you like, even though you feel a bit bad that I haven't done all those things, but still you feel okay, this is something I really wanted, this is something I was passionate about. What do you think about that?
Again, there's trade-offs. Yeah,
Yeah,
the whole thing is about being clear about what you're doing and why you're doing it, right? So, hey, look, I'm going to work hard, and that's going to allow my family for generations to be financially secure.
yeah,
I can understand that. One thing I'm doing right now is we'll talk about where I'm going, but
yeah,
one thing one of the places I'm going is working with these very wealthy multi-generational families, right? And
mhm,
there is a challenge around, hey, the patriarchs or whoever at the very top, they're not around, and what we get is financial stuff. They'll buy me a nice car. I get a BMW for graduating high school, but I still don't see the old man. You know, trade-offs, and just being very clear about the trade-offs and understanding that my story is not their story.
hmm, yeah, yeah. Okay, and I will have one more thing. In your personal life, in your characteristics of a person, what do you think has changed from the point you have started your journey And now, after knowing about a lot of things, after going through a lot of things, in your personal life as well, it's very hard to handle a lot of things, right? You have to go out of your marriage to just make things work while you were trying to, achieve something, whereas you have lost other things. What is the biggest character building things you have got in you, I'll say?
Look, the challenge is so many people like me and a lot of entrepreneurs is our type A personality, for lack of a better term. All right. I don't see too many type B personalities as CEOs or business owners. It's just not attractive to them.
Yeah.
So that what I call energy, that strong energy of that type A leader is both our blessing and our curse.
Yeah.
Okay. So my energy allowed me to drive and go. And one of the challenges is when you're like that, how come everybody else around me is not like that? How come they don't, bleed the way I do,
Yeah.
And I was just coaching a CEO who was doing what I used to do. And he's got a young marriage, he's got a young kid. I'm like, what, you realize what you're doing to yourself? And you're putting all these hours and you're upset that your people that you've hired don't want to put in the same crazy hours that you do.
Yeah. You cannot accept it. You feel like, I'm putting a lot.
What's the message you're sending down there? I want you to self-sacrifice to work for me. One of the things that really tipped me over. So, sometimes I've had coaches over the years. I believe in coaching. If I'm going to be a coach, I should be coached. All right. I've got to eat my own dog food, as Guy Kawasaki would say. Right. So that whole business of knowing who you are and where you want to go, it's sometimes difficult to just figure that out by yourself. And so maybe I'll learn something in a book. I'll learn something from a mentor. I'll learn something from a peer. I'll learn something from my coach. And one of the most significant smack upside the head experiences was reading a book by Joseph Campbell, who was the great mythologist who helped Spielberg and Lucas give the story arc for Star Wars. He was known for that. And he wrote a book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, one of the best books I've ever read, but it talks about the hero story throughout the millennia. And the essence of that story was the willingness to self-sacrifice for a greater cause. And I'm like, yeah, that's me. That's me. I'm willing to put it out there, right? And then at the end of the book, he goes pretty much, hey, reader, by the way, that whole idea is that you have to self-sacrifice to be a hero. That's just mythology. And I'm like, no, don't tell me that. Don't tell me that. Talk about your story catching up to reality. It did in one sentence, okay? And I'm like, oh my God, here I am wearing this badge of honor. I'm willing to self-sacrifice. In fact, I was willing to self-sacrifice my family as reality of it. When you self-sacrifice yourself, you don't do it by yourself, okay? And I said, at that point, that's it. I got to stop this noise about what it takes to be a hero and get out of the story of it and get into the reality of it. So that was one of the biggest aha wake-up calls, was the reality that you don't have to self-sacrifice to be a hero.
Yeah. There's a quote I was also going through that I think I've heard from Alex Harmozy, and he said, we always look for something inside champions, the successful people, but what they don't have is an off button. They cannot stop. They cannot stop being a player. They just cannot stop it, and that makes them, great. Whereas we just keep looking for what is the secret behind it. What is the secret behind it? What is the secret behind it? But it's that off button. We cannot just pause it.
I have had to work on it. So there's a profile, the DISC profile is one of the familiar ones. It's been around forever. And as a trial lawyer, I was 99D and 98I, which is dominance and influence, which is what you want from a trial lawyer, okay? But the problem is you don't just shut that off when you're at work and when you come home. You're still that high D and high I when you come home. And that high D was a challenge in my marriage. And through working on myself, I brought that D from 99 down to 50. And people at this said they've never seen anybody come down that far. All right. And because, as a joke I make in my workshops, how many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? Only one, but the light bulb has got to want to change. And at that point, I had enough pain to leverage the desire to change. Okay. So
Yeah.
most of us don't change until there's so much pain we're forced to do so. And that's why Dickens had Scrooge visit the pain of the future and bring it into his present to get transformation out of him. He was Tony Robbins of his day, Dickens. Okay, but my favorite book of all time is The Christmas Carol. It's a story of great personal transformation, and it comes from bringing our past into our present and our future into our present, so we can get leverage on ourselves now.
Ah, that's a light bulb for me, I'll say.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's like it's huge thing. Like this one line, I'm just, now it's going in my head. I'm just thinking about it, bringing your past and future right now, and then start from there.
Yeah.
Good. Don, there's a lot of business things you have gone through. Give us a bit about your personal life, how it was.
Personally, I've had some
Mhm.
challenges. I've been married 2 times, divorced 2 times. The first time was largely because we got married at 21 when we were pregnant, and we didn't really know each other. We're both good people, but we realized we're 2 different people. And for lack of a better term, we had what you might call an amicable divorce. Okay. I'm still friends with her today. We would still go to holidays together. The second marriage ended 2 years ago after 27 years, and I had what you might call a COVID divorce. And the problems in marriages during COVID were exponential because there was no space in the relationship. I had to pull my office into my house. She was a chiropractor, I had to pull her stuff into the house, and we're around each other all day long. And it just magnified the challenges in the marriage to the point that I was like, look, we're either going to fix this or you go see a lawyer. And she'd rather see a lawyer. And so, after separating the money out, California, all these dreams I built up and all I did save got cut in half. And at 66, that's kind of painful for that to happen. When it's the loss of your dreams as much as it is anything else. So I had to do, it really put me into a funk. And then I had to do what I would advise my clients to do, is to work on myself. And I didn't do any dating for a year. I decided I really need to work on myself. I can't bring damaged goods into a relationship with somebody else. I have to deal with the judge, that very heavy, how did you screw this up? How did you screw this up? How did you screw this up? Because I do take responsibility for things in my life, right? And so what was my responsibility in that? How come I couldn't have motivated her more? We got into a sort of codependency type situation, which wasn't healthy for either one of us. So that was a year ago, and now I'm like back on my feet again. I'm really excited about the work I'm doing. I've been dating here and there, and that's a whole interesting thing to do at this age, right?
Yeah, that's
because everybody's got some baggage and damage at this age, So the question is, how well have you worked on this? But
how's your that's interesting. So you mentioned you are bit dating here and there at this age. How do you meet? How do you meet new
it's
people?
called apps. It's called apps, and I just canceled. I was on 2 of them. I just canceled them both because that's just frustrating way to deal with things. And in the old days, you maybe went out and met somebody when you're out. but
Mhm.
there's not a lot of people my age going out anymore. I like to still go out, I like to go to clubs and dancing still, and concerts and all that crazy stuff. So um,
Uh-huh.
we'll see what happens. I've got a great family. I've got 3 sons. So from the first marriage, I got 2 sons. They live in town. I got 4 grandkids from them. And from my second marriage, I got a big 22-year-old. And so I have great relationships with my boys and great relationships with my grandkids. I've got a good group of friends around me. So I'm in good shape. Maybe I will, maybe I won't meet somebody that I can spend the rest of my life with, but I
Mhm.
can't condition my happiness on that.
Yeah.
I have to be present and be happy here and now, and not put anxiety by worrying about where I'll end up.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what
Don't.
anxiety is. Anxiety is bringing fear of the future into your present. That's anxiety.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Don't tell me about how it felt, because for a lot of entrepreneurs, they put all their breath, all their seconds, thinking about their business. They work so hard, and they work for so long, so hard, dreaming about it day and night. And there is a situation where you have to end your marriage. That's an emotional loss, your family loss, and then you also have to lose your money in half. Like, how is that? How hard is that? Because
Look, I'm not going to pretend. I was both. I'm like many of us. I'm very good at beating myself up. Okay, so nobody beats us up more than we do. They just can't hear that conversation, but nobody beats you up more than you do, right? Nobody's a bigger judge on yourself than you are.
yeah,
You say things to yourself in a mirror that you wouldn't allow anybody else to say to you, and so there was a phase of beating myself up and having to deal with that. There's a great Netflix movie, Stutz, Stutz, is about a psychologist, and he talked about that judge that comes down on us, and how it comes with a heavy hammer, right?
yeah,
And so I had to work through that, and to the extent that I had to be honest that there are things I could have done better, I've worked on trying to be a better person around that.
yeah,
I thought I had gotten really tolerant, but I think the situation got to a point where there was so much disconnection that I couldn't reel it back in. And when somebody checks out on a marriage, they've checked out. And that had been going on for years, and it just became magnified when we were around each other. It was so crazy back then, you couldn't even find a counselor. They were so busy. There was no counselors available during COVID.
yeah,
Trying to talk to a divorce attorney took forever. To just check my head about, we mediated the divorce because I didn't need any more conflict. I knew she was going to get half. Here's your half. Let's get it over with. All right. And move on. And I was also very attuned to the judgment that I would get from my third son about how I treated his mom through all of it. And afterwards, he told me he was impressed by how I handled the whole thing,
hmm,
because he was there and got to watch what went on. So he knows that I handled it gracefully, and that's the best I could ask for.
yeah. Thanks for sharing that with us, because it's very personal. Some people just cannot accept the reality. They just keep running away from it. But you have
Yeah,
like,
what they'll do is find somebody 20 years younger than them, and throw their money at the situation, and I've seen that a million different times.
Mhm.
And it's not funny, but a number of the people I've dated are the exes of that situation. Well, what happened? Well, he divorced me and found some woman 15 years younger than me,
Mm, yeah,
Not
yeah,
an uncommon scenario.
yeah. Very. I have seen that a lot, and sometimes we just talk in the in our friends group. This is what's happening. And they're like, we just giggling around it, but it's hard.
Yeah, just look
It's
at Bezos, all right? There's an example. Anyway.
yeah. So Don, how is things going right now after you have sold your company?
I've had 2 really good years financially. I've made as much money. It's different when you run in a business. There's leverage. And when you're just working by yourself, you know, I'm not going to ever get that same multiple, but I don't need that same multiple. You know, I make a good living using my skills that I have. And so the last 2 years have been great. And my goal moving forward. So a number of years ago, I met a fellow, Francesco Lombardo, and we both wrote books around. I wrote a book called 40/40 Solution.
40/40 Solution. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
All right. And the idea is, you know, you come up to one side of the line, the other one comes up to the other side of the line. The room in the middle is for the dialogue. It creates a safe space. And Francesco wrote a book called Safe Space. So we connected around that. And interestingly, he was a former financial guy who is coaching multi-generation wealthiest families on the planet about how to deal with each other, because the risk in those families tends to be on the behavioral side, not on the financial side. They have all the financial acumen in the world, unless they're completely reckless. But recklessness of the next generation or somebody, that's a behavioral problem. All right. And so I went to Athens, Greece for 5 days of intense training by Lombardo and the work that he does, and through a whole year program with him, just like the families would go through. And now he's about to unleash me on some of his families. All right. So I'm very excited about that work. It will be well paid. I'm going to be able to. One reason I like working with the CEOs is because when I affect them, it affects so many other people. If I just affect an employee, it doesn't have that same magnitude of impact. All right. It's not, certainly I get paid more than dealing with CEOs and employees, and they can make decisions faster, but it's really the influence that they have. So if I get them to an aha, it's a magnified influence when I'm dealing with people. And same thing with these families. You know, they employ a lot of people. They have a lot of goods and services that people need. And so one thing I've learned about money, it's just a big magnifying glass. You know, money makes people more of who they already are. So in my litigation days, if somebody's a victim, I sanctify that with $500,000. Now they just become a sanctified victim. If somebody's an idiot and you give them a whole bunch of money, they become a bigger idiot. If they already got an ego that's out of control and you add another couple of million to them, then they've got an ego even more out of control. And if they're a good person and you give them a lot of money, they can do a lot more good. I think of a Hollywood actor, Keanu Reeves is amazing like that guy. You know, he's one of the most humble people I've ever seen in Hollywood. You know, he just, with all that money, his ego is so in check and he does so much good for so many people. Just one example, right? The opposite of so much of what comes out of that environment, right?
Yeah,
so,
I agree.
Yeah. And so dealing with those families is one thing I'm focusing on now moving forward. And the other thing I want to do is, you know, I've presented over 1,000 times and a lot, over 600 times to these CEOs, and they'll have me come to their conventions and things like that. But basically, I'm just taking my workshops and putting them on a stage. And I really want to take the concepts in this book and turn it into a one-man show. All right. Okay. And I will get paid more for doing that. I'll get paid at least 10 grand, 15 grand, 20 grand if I have a good one-man show that I can, instead of just a really good workshop, right, that I bring to a convention. And so those are the two things, you know, working with those families and having a one-man show that pays me really well that I just love doing. And anytime I speak at a conference, it's always a fun situation. People are there to have a good time. We go out at night. I was just in Nashville for 2 nights with all these executives and had a great time, you know. So that's where I'm going with those two things.
How's your this one-man show? That's quite interesting for me. So how are you planning that? Do you have any strategy in place? You have been into many conferences. You have presented a lot of times, right? You mentioned like more than hundreds, thousands of times. Like what is your strategy going forward within that direction? Like what do you want to build out of it?
For me, so I do webinars with people and I give them a sheet of 24 different trainings I can do. I've done 14 different titles for LinkedIn Learning. So I'm good at teaching, right? And it's not hard for me I'm good at learning and I'm good at teaching, right? And explaining things to people in a way that hey, that's really helpful, right? And I also create a lot of tools. So now the challenge is because I'm moving as I get older, more and more away from the logical and more to the emotional side, and how we show up. So I can tell people about compliance, I can investigate, I can do all of that, but I've done that. All right. So I get paid well, but in a sense, it bores me. All right. And when you're an entrepreneur and you have an open calendar revenue wise, it's nice to get paid well. Okay. So I don't mind doing that. I don't do it all the time because it would burn me out if I did. Right. But I do like getting into sticky situations. I'm good at dealing with that. But that's just picking up broken pieces. So I don't want to pick up broken pieces anymore. I'd rather inspire people, help them out of their victimology. I don't care if the CEO's victimology or rank and file employees victimology. How do we get them out of that? All right. Because we all play that role. All right. And I enjoy doing that now more than anything else. So I'm moving more and more over to teaching things that I don't read anyplace else. So, I don't want to just be really good at teaching something that somebody else can also teach. I want to be really good at something that's truly unique. Working with the families, what Francesco has done is truly mind-blowingly unique. And he's the only one that does it. And now me and another person he's trained up to help him. The other guy's an NLP expert who's really super sharp. And the business about going on a stage, this forces me to take stuff I've generally done in 3 hours to not just squeeze it into 1 hour. I've got to kill 2/3 of the things I talk about. What do I really, what am I left with there? And how do I make it entertaining? So that's a fun thing for me to go through right now. And it's requires my creativity, right?
Yeah, truly. Like at this point of age as well, you seem super exciting, super passionate about what you're doing. That motivates me right now, looking at you. And like, sometimes I am just lying around my couch and I'm like, why I'm super lazy. And people like you when I see, and that motivates me to wake up early and do the thing. And what I personally believe, when you give your 100% to a thing, when you're passionate, you give your all, that is where you get satisfied. Uh, I can see that, excitement in you when you talk about your work.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, Hans, that one of the things that we've had this whole story that the goal is to see how quickly you can retire. I wouldn't know what to do with myself if I didn't have work. I'm not kidding. I don't golf. I've traveled. What am I going to spend my whole life nonstop traveling? I love where I live. I live in Coronado. This is gorgeous here. I live where other people want to visit, and I've got my whole family here. So what am I supposed to do during the day? I work out every day, so I'm in great shape for my age. I
am
love doing the work that I'm doing, and interesting thing, a lot of the Vistage chairs, the guys who run the groups, many of them are former CEOs, and some of them in their late 70s, early 80s, still sharp, staying in the game. They might have whittled down from 3 groups to 1 group at some point, but they don't want to be disconnected from that, because what do you do after that? I already spend my free time doing a lot of learning. I don't watch TV, so I read books, and I'm very curious about science and history. So that's where I spend more of my reading now than any place else.
So Don, give us one piece of advice. Let's say you are in your 20s and you're an entrepreneur. You are really passionate about making something out of scratch. What would be your one advice to that Don who is like 20 years and trying to make things work?
It comes out of my book, and it's the realization that I finally had to have is the goal of the true hero is to allow other people to become their own hero. Okay? How many people have done that with you in your life? If you've got more than 5 of them, you're blessed. And generally, that's not a parent, because as the saying goes, too close for comfort. The person who might have seen you for who you are might have been a coach, might have been an aunt or an uncle, might have been a teacher, probably not your parent, because they have a story about who you're supposed to be, right? And the true hero, if you allow other, think about the people in your life that have allowed you to be your own hero. You would do anything for them. You would, what can I do for you? Anything I can do. No bill is running, nothing. How can I do something for you? You've meant so much to me in my life. And you can't do that by being the type A. The type A doesn't allow that to happen. The type A, like I did, generates a codependency. And you wonder why nobody around you will think for themselves or step up or talk to you or any of those things. The type A doesn't listen well, and if you don't listen well, as the saying goes, you'll be surrounded by people who have nothing to say. Okay. So that whole business of bringing our energy down and being more inclusive is the challenge for so many CEOs I know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Agreed. I agree. I think 100% on that.
Collins talk about in Good to Great, he talked about level 5 humble leadership. It's another way of languaging what I talk about, right? The humble person is not the type A. Well, they've learned to humble themselves, right? And are you showing up as a humble person? Are you showing up gracefully, or are you showing up some other way? And how's that working for you?
Yeah. And this also reminds me of respect. Respect cannot be bought. Like, no matter how much money you make, you cannot buy the respect. You have to earn it. And that also comes when you give respect, when you become humble, when you're down to earth, when you appreciate others, while you really behave as a leader, whereas you give credit to others who deserves it. And I agree with you 100% on that. Don, one last question, before we end it. I can see we can talk for hours and hours, but we have a limitation of time. What has been?
I have to get back to work too. So,
so Don, what has been the hardest decision of your life? Like your personal, it can be your personal thing. It can be on your
my first
professional.
divorce. My first divorce, because the second one that was her decision, not mine. So my decision to divorce when I had 2 young boys, and I did care about the woman, but I realized that we were not on the same page. And how can I take the burden on me and not on them? That was hard. Quitting litigation wasn't hard. I was ready to do it. As I got everything out of it that I needed to get out of it. And the last thing I'll share here, which is very interesting, is the whole idea that things even have to be hard. So we're treated to the story of Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill, right? Up the hill. And then when it rolls back down, pushing it back up. And sooner or later, you get to the other side. It's as they say, it's wooden shoes on the way up and silk slippers on the way down, right? And so we tell ourselves it has to be hard before it can be easy. Why do we have to tell ourselves? Why do we have to put that languaging on top of what we have to do anyway? So when I went to law school, for example, all of my classmates were treated to the story that law school is hard, med school is hard, grad school is hard. And so if you go in with that story, guess what it's going to be for you? Hard. I had already had what I might consider a hard life up to that point, and I'm volunteering for this. I'm using my money for this, and so I decided to have fun going to law school. And I had 3 years of fun where my classmates had 3 years of hard. We got the same tests, we had the same degrees, we got all of that stuff, and I didn't burden myself with a story that wasn't even of my own making. So why does it have to be hard to grow a business? You just have to grow a business. Okay. You don't have to add the idea this is going to be hard. Well, I tell people, what if it was easy? What if it was fun? You still have to do the same things. You're just adding unnecessary anxiety and stress by telling yourself this is going to be hard.
Yeah,
Well, and you'll be right.
yeah, it's the story I think we tell ourselves, which build up the emotions, and that's how we start feeling.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what they say. That's why
Look,
they say.
there are times when I will channel my inner David Goggins. So David Goggins is the SEAL, and he's maniac, and he's like, do the hard thing. So every once in a while, I'm like, all right, when I need, I want, it feels good today. I want to do the hard thing in the gym or at something like that, or take some type of risk. But I play with that idea. I'm not telling myself, and oh, this is going to be hard. I'm like, oh, I'm going to do the hard thing.
Yeah.
It's more fun than anything else.
Yeah, and there's one more quote I can remember of. That's again I heard from Alex Harmozy. He says, "When it's hard, instead of thinking it's hard, think no one else will do it. That means I am the one who is only gonna do it, and that puts you in the power position instead of a victim position. And you just start feeling good about it. It's only me who can do it.
Yeah, but that person who finally jumps on that is not going to tell themselves this is going to be hard. They're like, I can do this.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome, Don. Thank you so much for sharing your stories with us and sharing a lot of nuggets, which going to be super helpful for the entrepreneurs out there who are listening to this one. And thank you so much for joining. And
So,
I
they
appreciate
can
it.
get it on my website, which is, I don't feel posted, but it's
Yeah.
just my name, donfin.com. There's a
Uh-huh.
PDF of that book and all the other books I've written, all the tools that I put together. They're just there, and nobody has to put in the email. They can just download the stuff.
Awesome. Can you spell your website name here for the people?
Yeah, it's just DONPHIN, myname.com. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Don. We would also link your website here inside the description for the people who ever want to go out, check out Don's book and all the other things he's doing. And it was really, really awesome talking to you, Don. Thank you so
It's
much.
my pleasure. Thank you very much. And you have a great day, huh?
Yep.
All right. Ciao.
Just
Bye-bye. Bye, everybody.